My fishing rod was still leaning against the back wall of the garage. My reading glasses, the ones I'd left on the kitchen counter every single morning for 11 years, were still sitting right where I'd put them the night before. I know because I went back for them. I stood at the front door of my own house at 6 in the morning, key in my hand, and I couldn't make myself put it in the lock, because it wasn't really my house anymore. My wife had made that clear the night before. Her daughter needed the space. That's what she said. Her daughter, Becca, 34 years old, newly divorced, needed to move back in. And apparently there wasn't room for both of us. I'm 63 years old. I lived in that house for 9 years. My name was on the deed. I drove away anyway. That's the part I still can't fully explain to people. Why did I just go? I ask myself that question more than I care to admit. And the only honest answer I have is this. I loved my wife. I'd loved her for 11 years. And when she looked at me that night with that particular expression, the one that said she'd already made her decision and this conversation was just a formality, something in me just went quiet. Not defeated, just quiet. I packed 2 bags, a duffel with clothes and my toiletries, and a canvas bag with my laptop, my chargers, and the folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk with all our financial documents. That folder. I'm glad I'd fucked to grab it. That folder saved me more than anything else in the months that followed. Her name was Loretta. We'd met at a church potluck in Savannah, Georgia, 11 years ago. She was a widow. I was divorced, 9 years out from a marriage that had ended quietly. No real drama, just 2 people who'd grown into different shapes. Loretta was warm and funny, and she made the best peach cobbler I'd ever tasted. She laughed at my jokes even when they weren't that good. We got married 2 years after we met, in a small ceremony in her backyard. Her 2 daughters standing on her side, my son standing on mine. Becca was the younger daughter, the difficult one, though I never said that out loud. She was the kind of person who filled every room she entered with a low-grade tension, like a weather system. Always something dramatic happening, always someone to blame. Her ex-husband, Derek, had lasted 6 years before he left. I didn't know Derek well, but I didn't blame him. The older daughter, Paulette, lived up in Charlotte with her husband and their kids. Paulette and I got along fine. She was practical, even keeled, called her mother every Sunday. We never had a problem. Becca and I were civil. That's the best word for it. Civil. She called me by my first name, never anything warmer, and I accepted that. I wasn't trying to be her father. Her father had died when she was 19, and I understood that meant something. I just wanted to be her mother's husband. That was all I'd ever asked for. After the divorce came through for Becca, she started calling Loretta every night. I could hear those phone calls from the other room. Long calls. An hour. Sometimes more. I'd go to bed and Loretta would still be on the phone. I noticed the change in my wife, the way she started seeming pulled in 2 directions. I told myself it was just a hard time, a mother worrying about her child. Natural. Then one Tuesday evening in November, Loretta sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She had her hands folded in front of her, the way she did when she'd already thought something through and just needed to say it. She said Becca was struggling, said she needed to come home to get back on her feet. Said it would just be temporary, 6 months maybe, and she hoped I would understand. I said of course. I meant it. Then she said there was one more thing. Becca didn't feel comfortable living in the same house as me. She'd told Loretta that she'd always felt like I looked down on her, that I made her feel unwelcome in her own mother's home. I sat there and listened to that and tried to find the specific moment where I'd done anything of the sort, and I couldn't find it. I asked Loretta if she believed that. She looked at the table. She said Becca was her daughter. I understood what that meant. It meant the answer was yes. She told me she thought it would be best if I stayed somewhere else for a while. Just while Becca got settled. Just temporarily. She said it in the same tone you'd use to ask someone to move their car out of the driveway. I sat there for a long moment. Then I got up and I packed those 2 bags. I didn't have a plan. I'm 63 years old and I didn't have a plan for where to sleep that night. I drove to a Hampton Inn on the interstate and paid for a room with my credit card. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat for about 20 minutes, just listening to the hum of the ice machine down the hall. Then I opened that folder. My name was on the deed to the house. Both of us were on the joint checking account, the one where my pension from 31 years as a civil engineer went every month. I had a savings account she didn't know the full balance of. Money I'd set aside methodically over the years. Old habit from before we married. And I had a financial advisor named Phil, who I'd worked with for over a decade, who knew my situation better than almost anyone. I called Phil the next morning. He answered on the second ring. He needn't say I told you so. He'd met Becca at a cookout once, and he had eyes. He just listened to what I told him, and then he said, very calmly, "Okay, here's what we do." First thing, I moved a significant portion of the funds from our joint account into my individual account. Not all of it. I left Loretta half because that was fair, and because I wasn't interested in being the kind of man who leaves his wife scrambling. But I moved my half that same day. Phil had a lawyer he trusted, a family law attorney up in Savannah named Hugh, who had an opening that Thursday. I took it. I didn't go back to the house for my fishing rod or my reading glasses. Not right away. What I did instead was make appointments and answer phone calls and sign documents and try to sleep in a hotel room that smelled like carpet cleaner. Loretta called me 3 times that first week. I answered twice. She sounded surprised, I think, that I wasn't coming back yet. She said Becca was getting settled. She said maybe we could talk about a timeline. I told her my lawyer would be in touch and I hung up. I don't say that with pride exactly. But I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to be managed. I wasn't going to sit in a hotel room waiting for permission to return to my own home. I was going to handle this the way I'd handled every hard thing in my adult life, methodically, without drama, and with my paperwork in order. Hugh was good. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. He told me that because my name was on the deed, I had not been legally required to leave, and that my voluntary departure complicated things somewhat, but not fatally. He said we had options. I told him I didn't want to fight over the house itself. I wanted a fair resolution. He said he could work with that. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. During that time, I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex near the river, the kind of place with a screened porch and mature oak trees in the parking lot. My son Nate helped me move in. He drove down from Atlanta with his truck and his girlfriend, and we carried boxes up a flight of stairs, and he didn't say much because he knew I didn't need him to say much. He just showed up. That mattered more than he knows. Nate was 40 at the time. We had our difficult years when he was younger. Some distance I still regret. But he'd grown into a solid man, and somewhere in his 30s, we'd found our way back to each other. He called me every Sunday, same as Paulette called Loretta. That parallel wasn't lost on me. The apartment was smaller than the house. Quieter. I bought a used armchair at an antique store on Whitaker Street and put it by the screened porch door, and that became where I sat in the mornings with my coffee. Just me and the oaks and whatever birds decided to show up. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't lonely sometimes. It was. 63 years old and starting over has a particular way to it that doesn't lift quickly. But I also noticed, slowly, that I was sleeping better. That my shoulders weren't tight when I woke up. That I wasn't listening for a particular tone in someone's voice to figure out what kind of evening it was going to be. I'd been retired for 2 years by then, from my engineering firm where I'd spent the last 18 years of my career. I still did occasional consulting work, small contracts, enough to stay sharp. But I had time now in a way I hadn't in decades, so I used it. I started writing. Nothing dramatic, just a newsletter, a free one, about infrastructure, bridges, water systems, the unglamorous but essential machinery of American cities. I'd spent 31 years thinking about these things professionally, and I still found them genuinely interesting. I wrote about the condition of aging water mains in mid-sized southern cities. I wrote about a bridge rehabilitation project in Tennessee that nobody was covering. I wrote about the engineering decisions behind why certain roads flood and others don't. People read it. Slowly at first, then more steadily. I got messages from city planners and engineering students and retired professionals who said they'd been looking for something exactly like this. I didn't monetize it. That wasn't the point. But I put my full name on it, and I was proud of what it was. A year in, a regional magazine asked if they could republish one of my pieces. I said yes. 6 months after that, a podcast that covered urban planning had me on as a guest. The host introduced me by my full name and my background and the work I was doing. It was a small podcast, maybe 8,000 listeners. But it was real. I didn't think much about Loretta during those months. Or rather, I thought about her less and less. The divorce had finalized. The house had been handled equitably. I didn't get everything I was owed, but I got enough, and more importantly, I got out cleanly. I had my apartment, my pension, my savings, my consulting work, my newsletter. I had Nate calling on Sundays. I joined a group of retired engineers who met monthly at a barbecue place on Drayton Street to argue about infrastructure policy and eat too much pulled pork. It was, genuinely, a good life. I'm not sure exactly when Loretta found the newsletter. I found out because Paulette called me. Paulette and I had stayed in occasional contact through the divorce, which I think surprised both of us. She'd apologized once, quietly, over the phone, said she thought her mother had handled things poorly. I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the honesty. So when her name came up on my phone on the Tuesday afternoon, I answered. She said she needed to tell me something, said her mother had been reading my newsletter for a while, said she'd come across it because someone had shared one of my pieces in a neighborhood Facebook group about the flooding issues on their street. Said Loretta had recognized my name and started reading everything. I said, I see. Paulette said her mother had cried. Said Loretta had told her she didn't know I was doing all this. Didn't know I was still working. Still contributing. Still contributing. She used the word thriving. Paulette said her mother had told her, I didn't know he was this person. I sat with that for a moment. Then Paulette said Becca had moved out 4 months ago. Said the arrangement had lasted about 8 months before the friction became too much even for Loretta. Said Becca was back with her own place now, doing better, and the house on Loretta's end was quiet. I said I was glad to hear it. Paulette said her mother wanted to call me. Said she wanted to talk. Said she told Paulette that she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. I looked out through the screen door at my oak trees. A pair of Carolina wrens were doing something complicated in the lower branches. I'd gotten a decent pair of binoculars sometime in the past year, and I'd developed, without entirely meaning to, something resembling a bird-watching habit. I told Paulette thank you for calling. I told her I was well. I told her to give her mother my best. Paulette was quiet for a second. Then she said, that's all? I thought about 11 years. I thought about a Tuesday evening in November with folded hands across a kitchen table. I thought about a hotel room that smelled like carpet cleaner and an ice machine down the hall. I told Paulette that I meant it sincerely. Give your mother my best. But that chapter was closed for me. Not out of anger. Just closed. She said she understood. She said she understood. She said she hoped I was happy. I told her honestly that I was. More than I'd expected to be, if I was being truthful. Loretta never called. I don't know if that was her decision or if Paulette discouraged her. It didn't matter much either way. I wasn't waiting. What I know is this. At 63, I packed 2 bags in the dark and drove to a Hampton Inn and sat on the edge of a bed in my coat. I was scared, though I wouldn't have admitted that to anyone at the time. I was scared and I was tired and I didn't know what came next. But I had a folder, and I had a son who showed up with a truck, and I had 31 years of knowing how to solve hard problems methodically, one step at a time. The apartment lease comes up for renewal next month. I've been looking at houses closer to the river. Something with a bigger porch, room to set up a proper workspace, maybe a second bedroom for when Nate visits with his kids. He's got 2 now, a boy and a girl, both under 5, chaos and joy in equal measure. My newsletter has about 4,000 subscribers now. Last week, someone from a university extension program reached out about collaborating on a public education series about aging water infrastructure. I said I'd think about it. I'm probably going to say yes. The fishing rod is gone. I assume Loretta donated it or threw it out. I bought a new one last spring. A nicer one than I'd have bought myself when I was worried about spending money on things just for me. I've been driving out to a reservoir about 40 minutes from town on Saturday mornings. I mostly don't catch anything significant. That's fine. That's never really been the point of fishing. The reading glasses I found at the bottom of my canvas bag, still in their case the week I moved into the apartment. Apparently I had grabbed them after all. I just didn't remember doing it. I keep them on the counter by the coffee maker. Every morning I pick them up and put them on, and I look out at the oak trees and the whatever birds, and I drink my coffee in the quiet. It's enough. It's more than enough, honestly. I'm just sorry it took being asked to leave my own house to understand that. I've thought a lot about cause and effect in the years since that November night, not in any mystical sense, just the plain, observable kind, the kind an engineer understands. Every load has a consequence. Every structural decision either holds or it doesn't. You can dress up a bad foundation with nice paint and good furniture, but eventually, the house tells the truth. Loretta made a choice. She made it with folded hands and a quiet voice, and what I think she believed was kindness, or at least reasonableness. She chose her daughter over her husband, which on its surface sounds like a thing a good mother does. But the choice wasn't really about love. It was about avoiding discomfort. Becca was loud in her unhappiness, and I was quiet in mine. And Loretta chose the path of least resistance. That's not a moral judgment. It's just what happened. And it set everything else in motion, because when she asked me to leave, I left. And when I left, I had to decide who I was going to be about it. I could have been bitter. Lord knows I had standing. I could have fought over every stick of furniture, dragged the proceedings out, made everyone miserable for 2 years instead of 8 months. Some men do that. I understand why. But I've spent 63 years learning that the way you handle the worst moments is the thing that actually defines you, not the moments themselves. Anyone can be decent when life is easy. What I chose instead was to handle it methodically. Move the money. Call Phil. See Hugh on Thursday. Find an apartment near the river. Unpack the boxes. Make the coffee. Open the laptop. Write the first newsletter. Then write another one. That's not heroism. That's just putting one foot in front of the other when you don't particularly feel like it. Discipline isn't something you summon in a crisis. It's something you've either built into yourself over decades or you haven't. I've been building it since I was 22 years old on my first job site, and it turned out to be the most useful thing I owned. Nate showing up with his truck. That mattered. People underestimate what it means to just show up. He didn't give me a speech. He didn't offer unsolicited opinions about his mother or about what I should have done differently. He just carried boxes up a flight of stairs and stayed for dinner. That's intelligence of a different kind. Knowing when someone needs presence and not words. And Paulette calling me 2 years later to tell me Loretta had been reading my newsletter and didn't recognize the man she'd asked to leave. That landed somewhere quiet in my chest. Not as vindication exactly. More as confirmation. Confirmation that the work was real. That the life I'd built in that apartment on the river was real. That I hadn't been pretending to be fine. The hardest thing about starting over at 63 isn't the logistics. The logistics are manageable if you've kept your paperwork in order and your head clear. The hardest thing is believing you still have something worth building. That the story isn't finished just because someone decided it was. It isn't. Not even close.